Hello and happy holidays. You're watching a special edition of the Scores Table this week. It's a holiday week where you're watching this, we're recording this probably about a week before you're watching it, but it's Brian Hitchin, Courtney Delks, Danny Riego, Josh Sabol here with you. And something that we wanted to talk about today is just the Miss Basketball process. Courtney's a Miss Basketball recipient herself. This year's race, we've been texting on and keeping tabs on it. It's kind of wide open, just speaking generally about it. But I guess it's just a jumping in point, Danny. I'll jump in with what you were talking about before we came on, and that's kicking it to Josh and just the process. I know what it looks like from the media side where we get emailed a ballot. I don't even think there's names on it. There might be some, but you basically you put down X number of names, and the top two are your Miss Basketball. It's 1 and 2. And it might not even be like that. It might just be the top one. Either way, we all get one vote. I know IndyStar is the sponsor of it, but I have the same say in it as everybody else. It's just one vote. Josh, what does it look like from a coach's standpoint, and how do you, as a coach, how did you approach it?
Yeah, so let's talk about what do people look for? Like, what do the voters look for? And like I said, like the process of it. So typically there's 400 high school basketball coaches, head coaches in the state, and we get a Google Doc from the IHSAA. I'm sorry, for the IBCA, the Indiana Basketball Coaches Association. And it's a Google form, and essentially what it does is it asks us to list like everything, like whether it's all states, whether it's Indiana All Stars, Miss Basketball, like they just want our like opinion on things. And for me personally, I can't speak for any coach, but I know that I put a lot of stock in winning. Yes, like, where you're playing at the next level is important. Yes, what your stats are and max preps are important. But for me, winning was always like the most important thing. So when you get the Google Doc and they go through everything, they'll end up being something like 20-ish names on there. And then it'll like kind of like go down to 4 or whatever it ends up being.
I think there's two aspects to the Miss Basketball voting and the Miss Basketball race that I find most fascinating. And the first is the presence of a state championship. Okay. So then you look at it and look back historically, like who's won Miss Basketball with state championships? And doing this off the top of my head, Jayla Smith won her junior year. Sydney Parrish won her junior year. Allie Paprick had a state championship, won. Carissa McLaughlin, at Homestead, Stephanie Mavunga. And a lot of people that finished second, Dana Evans, for example, finishing second to Carissa McLaughlin, didn't have a state championship. Taya Reimer, who was actually higher in the national rank, Dana was also, but Taya Reimer, that was actually higher in the national ranks than Stephanie Mavunga, didn't have a state championship at Hamilton Southeastern and ended up finishing second. Ari Wiggins is another really good example in the class of 21. And that doesn't always bear out. A kid like Madison Layden had 3 state championships and finished second to Sydney Parrish. So that's the first, is the presence of the state championship. The second, and I use this as a natural transition to hear Courtney's thoughts on this part particularly, but, if you work backwards, like Layla Hull in 23, Ayanna Patterson, 22, Jayla Smith, 21, Sydney Parrish, 20, Jory Allen, 19, Amy Dilk, 18, Chris McLaughlin, 17, Jackie Young, 16, Allie Paprick, 15, 14 was Whitney Jennings, 13 was Stephanie Mavunga, 12, Jessica Rupright, 11, Bria Goss, and then 10, Courtney Moses. To you, out of those, what would that be? 15 Miss Basketballs, only 3 of those kids have come out of schools that weren't a 4A school. Courtney Moses, now Courtney Delks, Jackie Young, and then Jessica Rupright. So Courtney, to you, in looking at the candidate pool for this year, what are your thoughts on Miss Basketball coming out of 4A? Do you think there's a 4A bias? Do you think there should be a 4A bias? And how difficult is it for a kid to win Miss Basketball outside of 4A?
Outside of 4A, I'm going to kick it straight to the 2016 winner, Jackie Young, who's a first-round pick in the WNBA and just won another WNBA championship. So if it has to be at the 4A, that's where the Miss Basketball is, Jackie Young is a prime example. That is completely false. That you just have to see there's talent. It depends where a kid lives at. And so for previous episode, we talked a lot about corn and Monticello. But my around my neighborhood growing up, there's cornfields everywhere. We're in the middle of nowhere. And so for a kid who's from an area like this, who's listening, yes, you can do it. And you got to go out and you got to work for it. And in the back of my mind, even like before the Miss Basketball was announced, even in the back of my mind, I have those thoughts of, okay, 2A school, even though I won 97 games. We lost, I think, 9 games over the course of 4 years, never won a state championship, was there twice, averaged, I think, 32 points, 5 steals, 5 assists my senior year. In the back of my mind, I'll be honest, I was still wondering, was that enough? Because I hear all the things, small school, 2A, too short, too this, too that. So that is still in the back of my mind because everybody talks about, well, the schedule isn't as tough. You're not this or that. And you can go on with all the things that I heard. But at the same time, I knew the work that I had put in and the basketball player that I was. And, playing for Danny, where I stood among other people in the nation and playing, I knew the type of basketball player I was and the leader. But it's still up to the votes, and you put that in other people's hands. So has the best candidate been named Miss Basketball? I think it's been pretty well, but are there a few kids who have gotten runner-up who could have been that Miss Basketball? Yeah, I think so.
Courtney,
Josh, go ahead, Hank, ask Courtney.
Something else, Courtney. What did you and your coach, or did your coach take steps to try and get you that extra notoriety, like get you more games around the Indianapolis area? I know there's that Indianapolis bias, which is a topic for another day probably, but did they make efforts to try and get you in front of, that kind of market, or in front of different teams playing the 4A teams like Ben Davis, like we talked about last week, those sort of things?
Absolutely. I mean, playing in the Hall of Fame Classic, I remember we added Fort Wayne to Elmhurst. I'm pretty sure we added Lures onto our schedule. Northwestern was really good during that time. So adding in some teams we played during the regular season. So our strength of schedule was definitely increased. And I can remember my head coach, Todd Law, was made these trifold pamphlets with all of my information, was sending it out to coaches. So he was advocating. And I can remember him advocating, I think there might've been a website, just because it's a 2A school, you gotta go for it. But that was never anything that me or my parents wanted. That was him taking that initiative because he knew. So it wasn't hey, look, Courtney's doing this. It was completely my coach. But he had to do those things. I think he knew how the voting was, and he wanted to make sure that he did everything he could to get it out there.
That's
in your heart of hearts, Courtney, do you think your verbal commitment to an in-state school like Purdue helped you?
I don't know, honestly, because when I look at the list of players, Layla Hall, North Carolina, Patterson, UConn, Sid goes to Oregon, Amy Dilk, Michigan, Jackie Young, Notre Dame. That's in-state. Joanny Jennings, Iowa. Bria Goss was Kentucky. I don't know, because it's so back and forth on where players are staying in-state or going out of state. The runner-up that year was Dee Dee Williams. She played on that amazing Ben Davis team. She was my roommate at Purdue and a teammate. So if I go out of state and Dee Dee stays at Purdue, does it change things? I don't know. I really don't.
I think it begs the question too. It's turned into a career award. Okay. It's not just the best senior season. So Jackie Young, we used her as an example before. I'll use her as an example again. She plays for the Las Vegas Aces. A kid on their roster is a kid by the name of Kirsten Bell. Okay. Jackie Young won Miss Basketball in 2016. Kirsten Bell won Ohio's Miss Basketball not once, not twice, but 3 times. So where do you guys stand on it has to go to a senior? If it is just the best season, could we award it to a junior? What are your thoughts there?
Courtney, why don't you lead us off?
I think that any year that Miss Basketball can open to anybody, I think that is a fantastic idea, because I think even you see some kids that are leaving. So I'll give Ashton Shade, for example. She leaves, she goes to prep school to LaLu. Well, her junior year, she could get Miss Basketball. If she was in that race, she could still get it. And I think that she's been a great representation of Indiana girls basketball. on a national stage. But I love that format. That I think that it changes the landscape of things. And you take, for example, on the girls' side, but even on the boys' side, Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith are the same year. Fletcher lives in Michigan for a couple years, comes to Indiana. I think that kind of took away some of his chances of getting Mr. Basketball. But it opens up an opportunity for kids coming in, coming out, where it's not completely a career. Let's focus on one season. I love that. And I think that too, like Josh was saying, if you're giving the ballot to people before the tournament, they can really, like, what's going on in a year, but like to sit there and research everybody's career and then get your team prepared for tournaments. Like, I think I love what Danny just brought up. I think that's something to consider.
What do you think, Hank?
I don't like that, actually.
Okay.
I think it's intriguing, but I think that it's nice to have kind of like it just be like a senior award thing, like an honor for a senior. I don't know. I'm trying to articulate it. I was going to let Josh talk and throw it out, but no, I think it's a cool tip of the cap and just kind of a nice send off for the best senior. And it is kind of like that career award, which I'm fine with. And if a kid has a strong senior season and gets, their name into the conversation, great. But I don't know. I just think there's a lot more value in it just being a senior only award. And I know other states, Ohio does it. I think South Dakota was before. We did our player of the year, the Argus Leaders player of the year was kind of a bigger deal than Miss Basketball, Mr. Basketball over there. And we had it open to everybody, which was cool because you saw some kids, like a kid who played at Wisconsin, won it 3 years in a row because he won state, got hosed on a bad call the next year, was clearly the best player in the state, and then COVID hit. Matthew Morse was his name. But I think here in Indiana, this is one of those unique traditions that y'all have here where it's like a career award where girls and boys grow up. It's like, I want to be Miss Basketball my senior year. And I think there's something cool to limiting it to just that window where it's like you have that 1 year, your one chance to get it versus 4 years. But that's just me. But I like the idea where you're coming from, Danny. I don't want to like talk down to it by any means, but I think it's interesting. I just don't think that it's the right approach necessarily, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If the boldest bullet points on the resume are from the junior year, that's why I bring that up. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
And so that's where I think maybe the timeline of the votes is wrong. And maybe that's what's broken in this, not broken, but maybe that's the altering in the system. If you want to give it to a senior, I still believe that, look, Jayla Smith winning the state championship for Lawrence North her junior year won her Miss Basketball over Ari Wiggins. Okay. It just did. It was the one distinguishing factor. Okay. So Josh, where do you land on that side of the argument?
Real quickly though, but Layla Hall didn't win state her. Well, I guess that's a bad example. Ayanna Patterson didn't win state her junior year.
Yeah.
But Carruthers did. So I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm playing straw man there, but does it balance out a little bit in that respect, Danny?
It probably does balance out. For every one example that I could give you, like Sydney Parrish winning the state championship her junior year and then going on to win it her senior year can be, counter argued with 2 or 3 or 4 examples. But I do think that people will use state championships won prior to their senior year as differentiating factors for basketball players and fitting the one. And so that's my point. If it is just the singular season, then shouldn't we devalue the state championship? And that sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, because Josh, again, at the risk of redundancy, that's exactly what you said. You value winning.
Here's the thing I think is most intriguing about what Danny brought up of opening it up to any other classes. Once you get, and this is just me coming from having played in the Big Ten and colleges, they don't just give awards out to the player of the year, the national player of the year. Doesn't just go to a senior. When you're in the pool of players, like who are the hoopers, who are the ballers, and with an award like Miss Basketball, it's probably going to go to an upperclassman. But if there's a stud younger classman that's balling out and has balled out over the upperclassman, like give it to the best player, because that, as you keep going up, USA basketball player, WNBA, like it doesn't matter. Oh, you're not old enough yet. Like if you can ball, you can ball. So let's award those players. And I think it creates this excitement too. Like somebody gets it, their freshman or sophomore year, that kids like, I'm watching Miss Basketball. Like they get to see that instead of I'm watching them they're on TV playing wherever they're playing at. Like it creates this different feel. So like it just got me kind of excited to hear that. But I think it's something that would be exciting from that standpoint.
Yeah, that is interesting, I guess, too, of like getting to watch them while they're playing currently and kind of putting that spotlight on them as players. Because right now it's like, oh, I watched future Miss Basketball, whatever, growing up. Like I saw her play through high school, and then I remember her Miss Basketball moment or whatever it is. You know, that's always kind of a cool aspect of it too. I mean, it's interesting, and I'm not vehemently against the idea of expanding it, but I personally, that's one of the traditions here, like I said, that I appreciate, and that it's kind of like a big reward, the crown jewel for everybody to aspire towards as a senior.
Well, let's look at the class of 2016 when Jackie won, right? So Lindsay Corsaro was a candidate, McDonald's All-American, went on to Kentucky, decommitted, then went to UCLA, and Ty Harris was there also. So Jackie wasn't even a sure shot to win in 16. If you did open it up to other classes, well, now you have Carissa McLaughlin. Does Jackie win it her junior year when Allie Papberg won it? McLaughlin had Dana Evans in her class. So it does definitely confuse the issue. Whereas maybe you previously had 4 or 5 candidates. Now you have 15 candidates, and maybe it's just a complete mess.
What about Indiana All-Stars? I'm curious, Courtney, what significance did that have for you as you mapped out goals and dreams and everything, you know, being Indiana All-Stars junior, senior years?
I think growing up that like Miss Basketball and it being an Indiana All-Star was something that, now don't get me wrong, like the award still holds lots of value, but you know, McDonald's All-American, Nike All-American, these things, I think USA Basketball are starting to take, like, if you're McDonald's All-American, you are on the USA Basketball team. Like for me, that's something I'm shooting for. And so like being Miss Basketball and Indiana All-Stars was it's opened up so many opportunities for me. I'm so extremely thankful to represent the state, and still like when I'm out walking around, hey, there's Miss Basketball. Like it holds a lot of value in the state. But I think we're moving into an era where McDonald's All-American and these awards, the U.S. playing on the USA Basketball team is starting to be, when you see a player from Indiana who is on that, now that there's some dogs right there. So, but it opens up so many opportunities, and I'm so thankful for that, those games against Kentucky. But I think there's something that we can go even higher with.
Yeah, that's a fascinating talking point. I'm curious, Josh, your thoughts on that. Like, does it seem like, I don't know, focused to some extent, and maybe it's too big of a probably, but you know.
Well, I mean, like kind of what we were saying earlier, like when you are an absolute like killer, like, you know, Courtney is, and you know, if you look at some of the previous Miss Basketballs and All-Stars that Coach Riego's mentioned, like it's definitely on your mind. Like, you know, when you're a young girl growing up in Indiana, it's such a basketball rich state, that, you know, you want to have that number one, like Courtney has over her left shoulder. Like you want to have that. Like you want to represent, you know, your school and your community. So being an Indiana All-Star is huge, because you know you're going to be in the rafters forever. Like it's a really really big deal, and I know, you know, for a lot of players, it's really special.
Danny, what are your thoughts? I mean, you work with kids regularly, you know, a lot of the high-end players too, players of all ages too. Is it something that they talk about, like when they're mapping out goals?
There's no question. There's no question that being an Indiana All-Star is romanticized. And all of the best players want to wear the one. They just do. I think it brings up a couple of interesting points of argument, though. And Courtney had mentioned, what is the effect of some of the national awards? And, you know, the Gatorade Player of the Year each year in Indiana. So each of the 50 states awards a Gatorade Player of the Year, and it is regardless of class. It is just whoever they think is the best player. Okay. I don't have this memorized. I can come probably pretty close. I won't try, but there are several examples of Miss Basketball and the Gatorade Player of the Year being different. And I think it happens more times than everybody would imagine. Okay, and that's okay. And I think what that speaks to is it speaks to the embodiment of the award, that there's more to it than just being an outstanding basketball player. And I think that's the charm of the award. But I think that piece of it in the national award, it would be interesting to ask some of these players if they would rather be a McDonald's All-American and the National Gatorade or the state's Gatorade Player of the Year or Miss Basketball. I think the answer right now is still resoundingly Miss Basketball.
Really?
But 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, I talked about an AAU. Kids are just playing in different states. I didn't make up the rules. It's just what people are doing. Okay. And so it's more of a national product now. It's more of a national environment now where kids are just playing in bordering states. So, but I do think that there's still a lot of charm in Miss Basketball. I think if Courtney, did you win Gatorade Player of the Year?
Yeah. Yep. We got the Vader in the old dairy barn. You can see, yeah.
Okay. So to put you completely on the spot right now, you got to give one back. Which one are you giving back?
I'm giving back Gatorade Player of the Year.
You're giving back Gatorade Player of the Year. I think most of the Miss Basketballs are going to say that, Hank.
Yeah, and like you guys are saying, like you could probably name off Miss Basketball for the last 10 years, but if I ask you like off the top of your head, like not Googling it, who was the Gatorade Player of the Year in 2018, like I don't think a lot of people would know that without like having to look it up. You know what I mean? And not saying it's not an inferior award. I mean, geez, who doesn't want to be a Gatorade Player of the Year? But, I think everyone knows the number one jersey, the number one Indiana jersey.
With the history of basketball in Indiana, 100% being Miss Basketball is, I mean, you can't take it. I remember sitting in Coach Versup's office. I think she was 84 Miss Basketball, and her saying, like, this is something that they'll never be able to take away from you. Like, you'll always be Indiana Miss Basketball, and you join such an elite list of players when you're on that. And I'm like, Gatorade Player of the Year, I'll give that back because they never, like, I didn't even get any free Gatorade. Like,
come on.
Like, come on. Not even, like, supply. Come on.
That's the thing. Like, it's Gatorade Player of the Year is cool for, like, the other sports in Indiana, at least. Like, volleyball's bad. Soccer's pretty cool. Sports that don't have a Miss Basketball type award, like they have Mr. Soccer, Miss Soccer, whatever, but it's not quite to the same prestige, I think it's fair to say, as Miss Basketball, Basketball, Mr. Football.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the more compelling question is Under Armour or McDonald's All-American versus Miss Basketball. You got to give one up. Which do you take? The national versus the local? I mean, the national is obviously a huge deal. The local, you're being etched into Indiana basketball lore, and like you said, Courtney, I mean, you're going up with all these legends, and they're not strangers. I mean, these are players that kids grow up watching. I mean, Sydney Parrish, I learned more about her before I even met Sydney last year, just because so many kids talk about her, and they'll have different stories about her, and she's just so idolized. And Courtney, I'm sure it's the same thing, with kids watching. I mean, Danny sent us a picture the other day. I think it was a family member, but still, point stands of a kid wearing your jersey, your name, your name on the back of their shirt. So I think that's the real interesting question is, again, getting back to that national versus the local, like what means more and what do kids value nowadays?
Hank, that's a really interesting distinction. Before we hear Courtney's thoughts on that, I think the interesting distinction is that Indiana basketball, if you're Miss Basketball, you get to play a game. You get to play against the Indiana Junior All-Stars. You get to play against Kentucky. You get to see it. With McDonald's, you get to play in the McDonald's All-American game, which is broadcast nationally. And when you're mentioned in publications or in talking about it, people will preface your name with McDonald's All-American, or they'll put it as a little point afterwards. Gatorade doesn't have a game. So maybe I think what you said is really, that distinction that you made is really smart, because with McDonald's, there's a game and there's a really, really big prize. And I've been to those McDonald's All-American games a lot, and they are, the pageantry surrounding those exceeds exponentially the Indiana Kentucky All-Star game. It just does, because it's a national thing. And no shame on the Indiana Kentucky All-Star game, but I think if you asked the McDonald's All-Americans that question on which they'd rather give back, I think you'd start getting a mixed bag at that point in time.
Go ahead, Courtney.
When it comes to circling back to your question about setting goals, what's that's like for a girl that's growing up in Indiana, I can remember going on Wikipedia taking a screenshot of all the Miss Basketballs that were in Indiana, and that was on our refrigerator in our house. And I on 2010, I had a question mark, and so like it was just something that was motivating, and I got to see those names all the time, and it's inspiring. So like when you're a Miss Basketball, you're in a position where you can inspire a next generation of hoopers, and I think that's the beauty of the game of Indiana. And I think girls basketball, the trajectory of it is, I mean, it's in really, really good hands with who we have out there.
I agree. And I think if you look at a lot of like our 26s and our 27s, like you always see them all the time, like, like they look up to, like you said, like the City Parishes or the Ashland Shades or the Courtney Delks, like they want to be that ever since they were 12 years old, and I think that's what makes the number one so special, is that this next generation, that's what they're aspiring to be.
It's like a special sorority of Miss Basketball winners, just like the connections. Like I remember last year in Layla one, I talked to Sid about it down in Bloomington before an NCAA tournament thing, and she talked about their relationship and that sort of thing. And I'm sure you can go back even further. Yana Patterson, when we presented her the jersey, she had stories too of going to games, watching, and telling her parents, like, I want to be that. And you talk to other girls who didn't win it and didn't even come close to it, and they still talk about putting it in like their dream journals and stuff. And it's a cool thing they've romanticized here in Indiana. That's one thing that I really do appreciate about covering sports here, and specifically girls basketball, is just you have something like that. And Indiana All-Stars too is such a huge deal, where like coaches, they begin campaigning at the beginning of the year and they don't stop. I mean, Josh, I'm sure you've done it too. I mean, that's a big deal too. I think when you get to the games, this is a topic for another show. I think the games maybe aren't as big of a deal now as they used to be, but just the honor and the opportunity to wear that jersey is just such a huge deal. And it's really cool. And it's super unique to Indiana in the best way possible, unlike the shot clock, the random draw, and some other things.
Yeah.
All right, we said we were going to go 10 minutes. It's minute number 41 right now. I'm going to test fate here, tempt it, and say, Danny, is there anything else you want to touch on before?
No, mute the mic.
All right, perfect. Courtney, Josh, anything?
Nope.
No.
All right, well, with that, oh, you got something, Courtney?
Oh, I just said I'm good. I probably need to go. What time? I need to go make dinner for the family.
I need to eat too.
Hey, the one thing I will say though is I know these are two separate podcasts, and we're wearing the same clothes. Okay, don't think that we just wear the same outfits.
Speak for yourself here, Sabol. We didn't all make coaches' money, all right? Well, I guess listen, I didn't make coaches' money here, Sabol. We thank you all so much for listening or watching, whatever you're doing. We'll be back again next week now for sure with plenty of hoop wrap-up content, holiday hoop wrap-up content. Shout out to Indiana Beach Amusement. If you know, you know. We'll talk to you again next week.